Hi, this here is Scott Collier. I'm here interviewing my Uncle Tom Collier. He was in the U.S. Navy aboard the second built Yorktown, you were saying?
Yeah, it was the first Yorktown was sunk at the Battle of Midway, and immediately they named another one that came out in 1943, and I went on Christmas Day in 1943.
Okay.
U.S. Yorktown.
Okay. Let me see here. Were you ever drafted, or did you enlist after Pearl Harbor?
Well, in those days, the draft, it wasn't exactly everybody was going to be drafted. And in order to get what you'd like to add, I enlisted 2 weeks. In other words, I enlisted 2 weeks before they drafted me, so I could get in the Navy. I wanted to go in the United States Navy.
Okay. Well, that answers that question. You wanted to go into the Navy? Why not the Army or anything? You like being at sea or something?
No, I always thought sailing would be enjoyable. Many times when you had nothing to do, sit out and watch them sailing along through the ocean with no carefree attitude. It's a whole carefree environment.
When you get seasick or anything?
No, I never did. I was fortunate. I never seasickness was none of my problems. I got homesick.
Yeah,
not seasick.
Okay. How did you feel about going to war? Were you ready for it?
Yes, it's strange. Just using the Vietnamese War, for instance, the Nam War. I don't think they ever prepared those young fellows for going to war.
Yeah.
When we, 1942, regular war, and I guess they used some kind of propaganda, all the songs and movies. And when it came time to go, you felt like it was your duty. And if to be left behind was, it was sadder to be left behind than going off, leaving your family.
Fighting for your country.
Fighting for the country, yeah. It just was a thing to do in those days.
What training were you put through? What did you do?
Well, they had
basic Army training or basic Navy training?
Well, and they call it boot camp. In the first 3 months, I actually was in boot camp for 3 months. The first 3 months, we went to the Great Lakes training station in just outside of Chicago, Illinois. And from there, after the boot camp, they tested us and figured that I'd make a good fire controlman. At that time, I had no idea what a fire controlman was, but I went to fire school right there at the naval station for 3 more months. And of course, a fire controlman is directing the fire of the guns on the ship. And I graduated from there, and then went right from there to Pearl Harbor and then got on the ship.
Okay, was your first ship the Yorktown?
The first ship I served on was the U.S. Yorktown, and the only ship I stayed right there to the end of the war.
Okay. What was your daily routine when you were on the Yorktown?
Well, the daily routine, one of the things that really was curious about the war, the Japanese came in the first thing in the morning. And everybody wasn't prepared. It was Sunday morning, nobody prepared. Well, they made it a point to stress the fact that they're never going to be surprised again early in the morning. So just before sunup in the morning, we'd go to battle stations and we'd spend time up there and then to secure. And if there was nothing real important going down, we would sometimes go down and study. We did have repair jobs on the machinery, the computer. What we had, some of the early computers and some of the early range finders and equipment. We had radar at that time also. And when they break down, we did the best we could to repair them. Some were very complicated. And, our repair job many times was just removing one and putting a new one in. Very much like the mechanics in the cars do now. They don't fix the cars, they parts of it. Replacers, that's all. But then, and then of course you went through your daily routine until And everything was always routine. You stood watch. You was on watch for 4 hours and off for 8 hours. And then, of course, when a battle came along and you had to go into battle, you'd sound the horn, and you had a station that you had to be in. And you would report to that station and do your job, whatever. I happened to have a station on a rangefinder on the very highest part of the ship, we were about 160 feet from the water line, way up there. And of course we could see and get a good view of the horizon, plus all those guys. And we trained, and they locked guns onto this computer, not a computer, it was a rangefinder. And we would turn it around and guide it. And it was a 5-inch, mostly 5-inch 38 guns, which was probably the best gun that came out of World War II. It could be used firing at anything on the sea or anything in the skies. It could go up to about 89 degrees and shoot below the horizon. So it was an interesting job. And at nighttime, when we were out at night, we fired by radar. And of course, during the day, it would be through sight. But we'd pick it up on radar maybe about 30 miles out and track it in. And we could shoot, the gun could shoot 30 miles. I'm not talking about 30 miles, man. Whatever, I guess. 30,000 feet it was. And we'd wait till it let it get into about 22,000 before we'd open up, because sometimes as soon as if we were getting close, they'd turn around and go outside of our range and then come back again. But we'd get them in there, and at least if he turned around, we'd be able to shoot at him from 22,000 to 30,000. And but it was an interesting job at that.
You're saying interesting. It'd be interesting if they would make a TV show where they'd take someone like you and just ask questions like this and have that on. You know, instead of having your announcer say, well, back in 1942, blah, blah, you know, they don't know nothing. You know, you're having a 40-year-old guy talking when, you know, someone like you who was there and could explain it more. I mean, it's interesting just listening.
I was a history teacher, and I used to have students, I'd ask them, what do you know about World War? This course would be about 1960.
Yeah.
So what do you know about World War II? I don't know. They didn't know anything about it. They didn't even know they won. I'd ask them sometime, I'd give a test, I'd put the Peloponnesian War in there, the Punic Wars, Civil War, World War I, World War II. And I said, which one came first? Which one was the first one to fight? Then I would say World War II before World War I. They had no conception, and most people have very little conception of time and relations, unless they're good students, and if they work at it, they can memorize all.
Okay. Was the Yorktown in battle when you were first put on it, or was it like docked, or what?
Oh, when it was docked in Pearl Harbor. I got on it on Christmas Day on the 26th. We went out to see him practice a little bit, and then we came back, and about 2 days later, we went to the first battle I was in in the Marshall Islands. And of course, Inuitak is later on. It's in that atoll there, that Bikini, where they dropped the atomic bomb to practice dropping the atomic bomb to see what would happen. That you hear so much about. But by the time we got to Inuitak, it was, it took a couple of days. It was one of those islands that we never occupied. We just bypassed a lot of islands. They just put it out to all the, God, I went in there and captured all the troops that were on there and destroyed all the equipment there. And they just bypassed it, left it alone. From that time on, it wasn't even heard of anymore. But they had what they called an island hopping. And that's the way they fought the World War. They'd hop from island to island, bypass the tough ones, and some of the islands that would take the loss of life would be too great to capture them. They just bypassed them.
Yeah.
And they couldn't supply them after we bypassed them. And the big islands, every time we went by it, we'd make an attack on it to make sure that they weren't having a buildup on any of those islands.
Mm-hmm. Okay, you said you got on the Yorktown after the first Yorktown was destroyed in the Battle of Midway, right?
Yes, the first Yorktown was sunk at the Battle of Midway.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you realize that probably the greatest sea battle the world ever knew and ever will know.
Yeah.
There's going to be anything like it. Was the Battle of Midway. And probably it was at that time, up until the Battle of Midway, we were fighting on the defense. After the Battle of Midway, the United States Navy went on the offense.
Mm-hmm.
When I'm talking about, I mentioned that I'd gone on Christmas Day in 1943. We had no fleet.
Mm-hmm.
The Yorktown's an Essex class character. There was the Hornet and the Hornet and the Yorktown were it was the Essex and the Yorktown were the only two of that class of carriers. We went out and we went to Inuitak. We had two brand new carriers. We had the old Enterprise, Saratoga, and a couple of baby carriers, which were Kaiser put some flat tops on Liberty ships and called them aircraft carriers. But that's all we had. And there was just one task force of the Navy. That was it. And later on, at the end of the war, we had 3 task forces with just as many ships and actually more ships than they had in that first one that went out alone. So the Navy kept getting bigger and we kept growing. And every time we come back to port, there'd be another aircraft carrier ready to join the fleet. And it was called, if Halsey was in charge of it, it was the 3rd Fleet. And if Michener was in charge of it, it was called the 5th Fleet.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, they went out and there'd be 3 task forces spread out over the horizon. Each one of them be away from, but they all work in unison. When an attack came about or when they planned some action of some kind, the head admiral would take charge and he'd coordinate the whole activity and it would work out good.
Who was the head of your ship?
We had a captain. We always had an admiral on our ship, but the admiral was never was in charge of the ship. It was the captain. Mm-hmm. And we had first one was a guy named Clark, and I was on the ship maybe 4 or 5 months. And Clark, he made an admiral, and he got another. They sent him to another position. Mm-hmm. But the admiral on your ship, each task force had an admiral in charge of it. Mm-hmm. And the 3 task force had either there was 2 famous, they were the whole war. There's a guy named Admiral Michener, and Admiral Halsey. Admiral Halsey was the most famous. And I think Michener was ever as good a commander as Halsey had just been around longer. Yeah. But they were, of course, the fellow on our ship was a guy named Radford, Admiral Radford. And Admiral Radford, after the war, was he was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff for a number of years. Mm-hmm. Of course, he's gone now. Since gone. Most of these fellows, the only place you hear the names anymore in history books. Yeah. But Halsey was supposed to lead the battle at Midway. He got sick, and they just put a guy named Spruance on there. He went out there and did a magnificent job, and really didn't have the experience or the know-how that many other admirals had, but it was Halsey that picked him because he had faith in him and he picked the right guy.
Okay, you said you weren't in Midway, but what were some battles that you were in?
Well, I ended up in 9 course, there's sometimes you might fight 3 or 4 different places and be one battle.
Yeah.
And all of them, they was first the Battle of the Marshall Islands. Mm-hmm. And of course, we went Marshall Islands, we started in Weetok, but we ended up in Guam and Tinian and Saipan, and it was the conquest of those islands that made it possible to bomb Japan from land-based airplanes. Mm-hmm. They took Guam first the biggest one was Saipan. It was a top island, and they knocked the mountains down and made a big air base going over there. But then Tinian was another island where they had the B-29s came along and flew from there. And then, of course, from Guam, which was one of our islands that were under the protectorship of the United States. And maybe one day it will also be a state like Hawaii. Mm-hmm. But and once they had the Marshalls, and then they made the build-up on Marshall Island, and it was from, I think it was from Saipan where the airplane, Nola Gay Nola Gay, the one that dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Oh, what were you saying? What was the name of it?
ENLO Gay, I think it was Enola Gay.
That was Enola Gray?
Gay.
I got it. My mind's blank. I should know this, but
it's it was from those islands. But then that actually was really we got by. There was the biggest island out there, the most powerful was a place called Truk. And today it's one of the people come from all over the world to go there in the deep sea and go out and see all the ships on the bay. It's still an interesting place to go, which one day I'd like to go there myself. But it was too powerful, and all they did was cut it off and bypassed it and went around it. And every time we coming or going someplace, we'd make an attack on them, make sure that they wasn't. And the only way they could build it up was submarines, and they couldn't. It was too long a trip from Japan to Truk to bring in everything by submarines. So it really was never of any value to the Japanese after they bombed it real. And also went in with the battle wagon and cruisers and shot up the island. But it was they had gotten Nimitz, who was the head admiral in the whole Pacific Fleet, and they come along with this plan that they were going to bypass islands and just take the ones they really needed. Mm-hmm. They needed one and of course you can see why they took the Marshalls. They knew an airplane, the B-29, was coming out that could fly from there to Japan and back with a big heavy load. But even that, we had to go up in a place called halfway between Japan and the Marshall Islands, was a place called Bowen. And the Bowens is the most famous place there was Iwo Jima. Mm-hmm. And you hear about Iwo Jima, but it was Chichijima, another little island there. That was in one respect the most important part of it wasn't the big battle, was fought because all the troops were in Iwo Jima. And it's famous because of the putting up of the flag, which is the memorial down in Washington, D.C., but it was Chichijima that was the strategic island they needed. They needed that for one purpose. When these bombers would take off and they go to Japan, and if they got hit, they'd limp back and they would go to Chichijima and land there, repair it, and then fly back. Or they had rescue planes there that anybody in the ships had to go down in the sea, they'd go get them, land on the water, and pick them up. But it was they couldn't. And also there had been an airfield there, and I don't think the ships could have gotten to Japan unless they took that island. And that was even though we hear about Iwo Jima all the time, it was Chichijima that was the important island.
Okay, during all these battles, were you ever close to being 6 feet under?
Our ship got hit about 5 different times.
Was like kamikazes or?
Well, they were, the one that really hit us and put the biggest hole in us, if he'd have been a kamikaze, we might have, he pulled out, he dropped the bomb, pulled out. I would say the bomb went about, by me about 15 feet away. It didn't go off then, it waited until it got down near the water line before it went off. It blew up and blew a big hole in the side. We never stopped, we kept right on going. One time, 3 torpedo planes came. They were bearing down on us, and we were shooting at them. And all 3 torpedoes malfunctioned. 2 of them didn't even come off the rack. It was hanging up when it went over the ship. The thing was dangling from the bottom of the airplane. I think the 3rd guy was already dead. We must have hit him pretty good. He was a fire burning. But if they had put those 3 torpedoes inside of us, we probably used 2nd Yorktown. But there was, right after that was, again going back to Midway, there was a battle called First Battle of the Philippine Sea. There's a great story. They call it the Great Day of the Great Turkey Shoot. And in that, the Japanese ships launched their airplanes, landed them at Midway, refueled them, and then they were supposed to come on to hit our task force. And they did. Many of them got through. But someone got the bright idea that that's what they were doing. I don't know how they found out. Maybe some guy just luckily went on that or followed them in and saw that they were landing. So all our ships went, and not all of us, a lot of the airplanes went. And when they landed, they shoot them up on the ground. And they call it the Great Turkey Shoot because they shot down over 400 Japanese planes that day. And then that night, one of the weirdest things that ever happened in the war, as far as I was concerned, was Halsey ordered all the planes to go after the remaining part of the Japanese fleet. And they all took off just before dusk. And he knew it'd be dark when they came back. And they had been flying those planes and fighting all day. They took off and went and sunk a couple of aircraft carriers, a couple of heavy cruisers, a number of ships. But coming back at night, and you're very conscious of having no light on ships when you're at sea and during wartime. But they had these big searchlights. The Admiral ordered them to put on the searchlight so the planes could land on the aircraft carrier. They lit up the ship. So the ones that got back could land. And, of course, for 2 weeks afterwards, we were picking pilots up in the sea. They float around on those little
rubber rafts. Oh, I thought you meant they would be dead or something. Think they'd be eaten up by sharks or something?
Well, many of them were dead. Nobody knows really what happened to them.
Well, they were on rafts, though?
Yeah, a lot of them were on rafts. And what happened was they just ran out of fuel. They couldn't get back. And, of course, some were shot down at the fighting, but most of them just ran out of fuel and they land in the sea and they have about 6-7 minutes to get this little boat out here, blow it up, get themselves all on and sit on that, float on it.
Scream your head off hoping you guys hear.
It's a big ocean. They were many of them got off track, and some of them were wounded, but it took about 2 weeks from the time the battle was to 2 weeks later. We're still picking them up. But one thing, a pilot in the United States Navy, they would go to great lengths to make sure that they got back if it was fought off. Later on in the war, we lost a pilot in the Sea of Japan, which is on the other side of Japan. And this big seaplane had gone out and picked up 10 pilots out of the water, 10 pilots and crewmen out of the water. And they were on the way back, and they ordered that to go fly across Japan, the Sea of Japan, and pick this pilot off our ship. And they came back, and when they got to our formation, they landed. They couldn't make it back to where they came from because they didn't have the fuel. They landed in our formation. And they sent the boats out there and picked them up and brought them back. And then they sank the airplane. We shot at the airplane until we sank it. And here's a plane that must have cost probably $1.5 million, $2 million. They sunk it just for the life of one pilot, which they thought was worth it.
Yeah.
And of course, it paid off because those pilots fought harder. They didn't mind it. If they got shot down, they knew they had a chance of getting back.
Was there any other time that you were close to being killed?
Well, I want to bring one point out here that the first battle of the Philippine Sea was important because after that defeat of the Japanese fleet, it was obvious to everybody that the United States was going to win the war in the Pacific Ocean against the Japanese because they had lost and did not have the production in Japan to produce the ships needed. Every time we sunk one of those, they never replaced them. Every time they sunk one of ours, we replaced it with 2 or 3 more. And that actually was the turning point. From that time on, they knew that the United States was going to win the war in the Pacific. Although there's the second battle of the Philippine Sea came about when the Americans returned to the Philippine Islands, and they were going ashore, and the Japanese got what fleet they had left and headed south and to try to stop the Americans from landing. And Halsey as it worked out, the mistake wasn't fully, but he come close to making a real drastic mistake. He sent the main force of the fleet north to seek out the remaining powerful Japanese ships, but they had another force covering the smaller ships, and they came down and going down between Samar and where the landings were taking place, and they got very, very close, and at the last moment they turned around and left, and all they had to protect them was a few of these baby carriers that I was talking about earlier, and a few of the older and smaller ships. The powerful fleet had gone north, but it worked out, and the disaster out of probably another mistake that the Japanese had, their leader or the commanders of their ships had made. But from that time on, and then even after the second battle of the Philippine Sea, they had no powerful ship. Even though that force went north, it destroyed enough. What was left of the fleet, there was never a factor in the war after that.
Okay. Okay, let me ask it this way. Before, when you first started to go into the Navy, what was your attitude toward the Japs or the Germans?
Well, like I said, I mentioned before, the propaganda.
Yeah.
The term Jap is a very negative word, and it's an ethnic slur.
Mm-hmm.
And they wanted to put him down. Everybody was a Jap to us.
Mm-hmm.
That was the worst thing you could call them. Just those Japs. But this had been brought on with movies at that time. Showed guys in the trenches and being bayoneted by some screaming Japanese guy that was very cruel and killed people when he didn't have to and that type of thing. So you were ready, and everybody, and they were Japs. I never had much, in fact, I never had any duty against the Germans, but it would have been the same thing. The Bosch, you call them
Nazi bastards,
things like that. Yeah, it was just that you'd read the propaganda, you'd heard the propaganda, and you went to school and you talked about those dirty Germans who were killing the Jewish people and invading in France, going over these small countries. And you had the stories of Anne Frank and a number of other things that you read about, how they mistreat the Jewish people in Poland, and how supposedly cruel they were. But I imagine the Japanese and Germans telling us how cruel we were.
Did you ever kill a Jap or a German?
Well,
you said you weren't involved with the Germans that much.
No, German.
Did you ever fire a gun?
Yeah, I fired guns. We shot down 14 airplanes. The crew was in them. Mm-hmm. How many others we hit and don't have any idea. But we shot down. It was 14 that our guns got credit for shooting down during the war. Of course, it wasn't like looking right in the guy's eye when you're killing him or he's trying to kill you. It was kind of distant and didn't have the same effect on you as
kamikaze in the water or something. Yeah.
Even today, when the Japanese do some of the things they're doing in our world trade today, some of the way they'll tell us they're going to do one thing and do something else. It was the same kind of thinking that went on in their minds when they attacked Pearl Harbor. If you remember the story that we had the American ambassador, the Japanese ambassador to America was in the conference with Cordell Hull, our Secretary of State, talking peace at the time that was going on. The very moment it was going on, he was talking about it. So we were taught all, you were showed all these things. You didn't, and even today, I don't have anything. I'm not real fond of the Japanese people.
No, because they're coming over here buying every building in the country just about.
I do respect them, though, because when I went, after the war was over, I went into Japan, and they educate their children.
Yeah.
Of course, they can do in a totalitarian state like that. They can tell you got to go to school. You got to go to school, and of course, it was great dishonor to fail in school. They had what they call Harry-Carrying, and students were always committing suicide when they failed. They couldn't go back to their villages, couldn't go back if they failed. And in America, of course, our way of life is nothing like that at all. Yeah. You have a choice. Everybody has the right to get an education, but they have to go out and get it. If they don't want an education, they got a right to be ignorant in the United States, which is sad in some way. Yeah. But they're hardworking people. And, in fact, when I went in Japan, I was in there 4 days after the war was over, and all the rubble, they had it piled up neat, streets clean. They hadn't got rid of the rubble because they had no place to take it, but it's all piled up neat. And I remember years and years after that in Europe, they never got around to even cleaning up some of those bombings. But again, I say they're hardworking people, and they do have some respect coming. But when it comes to dealing with them, I don't. Yeah, they've showed you here in Akron. They came in and they didn't hesitate to close the rubber shop. There are other things that I believe that some do with the unions. I'm always feeling that the unions drove a lot of the rubber companies out of Akron. But Japanese didn't hesitate. And they didn't mind. They told us they were coming back here. And then they went to the Nashville, which is, if you want to look at it the way, you can't trust them. Yeah. And you do have that feeling now. Well, when you talk about Japs, there's some people in the Navy, United States Navy, thought MacArthur was one step above a Jap. That's all. He was not liked at all in the Navy because he made some very, very, you hear it all the time. He said, "I shall return." Mm-hmm. He took 5 million people with him back to the Philippine Islands. He was only, "He shall return, I shall return." And this never went over too well with, especially the sailors who maybe not invaded those islands, but had been there long before he decided to come back. And but that was just, he was an outstanding general and did his share. But again, he was one of those inner United States forces battles that always go on. Yeah. The Marines are great. When you're in the Marines, they're the greatest. When you're in the Navy, they're the greatest. When you're in the Army, they're the greatest. In the Air Corps, they're the greatest. In fact, I read a book the other day, The Air Force Won the War. I didn't really figure that one
out. What was your attitudes toward your allies? I mean, were you more toward looking at helping American than you were a Frenchman or an Englishman or
you're all allies. The stories I tell them, remember about our allies. First name was Australians and New Zealanders, who did a magnificent job of fighting in North Africa. They were great soldiers. But we used to supply them. The United States would give them guns and ammunition and bombs and all things like that. And they would in turn give us food. You used to get butter in a can. And then you used to get supposedly sheep, but they're mutton. If you're ever eating the difference between sheep and mutton, mutton is probably the most foulest smelling and the foulest tasting food in the world. Lamb is the greatest thing ever. Mutton. And of course, we get this mutton and this butter. Both bad. Everybody would yell, when we'd have a meal of mutton, and everybody would say, "Hey, man," and the garbage cans, and you weren't getting enough to eat, and the garbage cans would be full, they'd throw it away, and they'd say, "Hey, tell them they can have back their mutton, give us back our bombs. We'll try eating those things." It was just, but you always respected the Allies. Even I get awful irritated. Of course, we were giving that propaganda against the Russians. And I always got irritated because Russians helped win the war too. They fought hard. In fact, they lost 20 million men. We never even come close to losing a million. They lost 20, not men, women, and children. Yeah. 20 million citizens. And I always, it kind of irritates me to hear people talk about we should have, after the war, we should have destroyed the Russians. I think that the way we did it, although it's bent us into bankruptcy almost, we beat them in the final end.
Yeah. And, but do you think a lot of stuff, it would have been better if we would have did what Patton said? We're over here, we got everything going our way.
Patton wasn't all sane, He was
hey, Patton, I'm sorry, I like Patton.
Patton, yeah, that was all right. But no, the greatest thing in you've got to remember that war was ended in, in April of 45 in Germany. And by that time, and Pat coming through that summer with the idea to go on and all the Americans, you remember Christmas coming. Mm-hmm. All over the United States, there's mothers of all these boys that are over there in Europe. And there was no way in the world that they could ever. If the war was over, what we'd set out to do was already done. That was to defeat Germany. And it's time to come home. And to have said, we're going on to fight Russia now, there's no way Truman would ever gotten away with that. Yeah. Although, all the story was in those days, it was, of course, I wasn't around. We were still fighting in the Pacific Ocean, at the Far East. The mothers were starting, bring our boys home for Christmas, bring them home for Christmas. That's all you heard. And the biggest part of them got home for Christmas. Mm-hmm. Not anybody from the Far East. They were coming. A lot of them were coming home for leaves at Christmas time, and then come over to. But then the war ended in the Pacific Ocean in August of 1945. Mm-hmm. So but our allies. You can't, the British, you've got to admire them greatly because they held off Germany until we got ready. France lost in a hurry. They just didn't have the military force they thought they had. The little countries couldn't stop anybody. They weren't big enough. But once we turned it around in Europe and went back in there, and of course, all that made it easier to fight it. They couldn't give any help to the Japanese, and the Japanese are kind of left alone out there. At that time, it was almost America fighting Japan alone. Mm-hmm. There were a lot of help in some areas, most of it in the Navy. If the war was over, by the time the British and French fleet got around and got to the Pacific Ocean, the war was over. Mm-hmm. And I was there the day our ship was there the day that the European fleet steamed met us, and we all joined together. They had 1,500 airplanes, both all our allies and United States planes flew over the fleets. It was an exciting day, but it was really not needed after that. Yeah. We had early in the war that English had fought around Singapore and Malaysia in that area, but they weren't too successful at that time. They were kind of driven out of that area. But our allies, I think they worked together well. Even though Eisenhower and Montgomery never got along. I think most of them did.
Okay, you were talking a little bit earlier there about mothers and how they wanted their sons home for Christmas and how they, were related, how they were not, how they wanted, how they really, the love. Okay, I want you to describe your relationships with some of your fellow seamen. I mean, did you have a best friend on the ship, or?
Sure, you had. It's like any. Just because you're in the Navy, your way of life doesn't change. You kind of migrate to people like yourself. People have the same interests that you do. Your best buddies are usually the guy that you get along with very easily. And what reason you get along with them, most of the time you don't even realize what it is. You're happy to be in that person's company. And I'm in about 10 really close friends. The one really, really, truly close friend. There was a guy named John Mullins from Galveston, Texas. And of course, whenever one of us got in trouble, the other one was with us. We both got in trouble at the same time. And, but he was one of the smoothest characters I ever met. He could get us out of trouble pretty good.
Well, okay, what was your funniest time?
Oh,
I mean,
yeah,
you could probably, knowing you could probably name 4 or 5 of them like that.
Yeah, if you ask any serviceman who was in the war, and 9 times out of 10, the bad things that happen, things for some reason your mind has a way of putting out of it anything that's bad. That's what when they're talking about psychology, someone murders somebody and then they don't remember it. Well, that's the mind putting it out of them. I mean, you're just telling your mind it didn't happen, you put it out. Same thing with the war. When something happened that was really bad, you almost forget those things. You forget even the bad days. You'll say, damn, if I ever get out of this damn Navy, I'm never coming back,
Do you remember your scariest moment, or when you were getting bombed or something?
Yeah, every time an airplane came into your ship, you were scared.
Yeah.
But you're trained to go on, fight. You're trained so well that you do when you're scared, you do what's right. Yeah, that's training. But then when it comes down to this idea of the good things and all the good things that happened to you and the things you remember that you had fun doing, you remember minute little details of something happened one day in the life, and yet that very same day you might remember that one good thing that happened to you and forget about where you saw a crew member getting killed or like a plane crashing or an enemy plane coming in and striking into the ship. A kamikaze coming in, dive bombing into a ship.
When that guy shot that missile that he said landed 15 feet.
Well, he didn't show it was a bomb.
A bomb then.
Yeah.
That went all the way down to the bottom ship. Was that your scariest moment?
Oh, no, that happened so fast that I didn't realize. The only realized later on after it was all over. We just got up on top and then there was a tube that went down, a great big round tube. It's an air tube is what it was. And the bomb had gone right through that air tube, right 15 feet away from where I was sitting. And then it went right down the side of the ship and got down near the waterline when it exploded. Now that wasn't scary at all because you don't have time to think. One time, the very first thing that ever happened to me in the war was when I was in the Utah. I'm sitting there, we're waiting for something to happen. It's all kind of quiet. All of a sudden, you hear this airplane go zoom. He just went right over us, maybe 50 feet above us. And it went by, and I thought, then I got to thinking, there's no Japanese. There's no American ship airplanes up. We don't have anybody. They're all down on the ships. They're not. And I said, gee, that had to be a Japanese ship. Now this guy, this guy here, he probably didn't even know we were there either. We were in the dark. He flew right by us. If he'd been a little lower, he might have crashed right into the ship, not even known it. But two scary days that bomb going through there happened on St. Patrick's Day in 1944, and then in St. Patrick's Day in 1940. Yeah, we were, like I say, on the 1944, this bomb went right beside us, and if you'd gone, that was on St. Patrick's Day, and following St. Patrick's Day, we were going into Chichijima, which I talked about before, and Iwo Jima. It was covering landings at Iwo Jima. And this airplane came out of the fog, and I don't think he knew where he was either. And he was flying right at us, and he didn't want to crash into our ship because if he wanted to, he'd crash. And it could very well crash into And being that close and seeing the guy coming and not being able to stop him, that was a frightening experience. Probably some of the most scary had nothing to do with the enemy. When the ships on an aircraft carrier, you don't have to be at war to get killed on an aircraft carrier. Those planes like coming in and landing and taking off. And sometimes when they land, the guns on the airplane would go off and shoot up our ship. Other times they would crack up and go and bust out in flames, crack into, into where people were. Those lines that they hook them on, they would break, whip like a whip. Those kind of things are a little scary. It seems like when you have time to think about something, you're not busy, that's when you have your scariest moment. Oftentimes you probably the closest you come to getting killed, you didn't even know what happened. We used to have, when you shoot the guns, and the shells would explode up, and sometimes they come falling out of the sky and land all over your ship. You could very well been hit with a piece of that. But war is in some ways strange. When you think about war, you think about why you got scared this time and you had no reason to, and other times things happen, you're not even frightened. Like I said once before, they train you well. And you do things without thinking. And once you start, you're doing, and then sometimes you do things and you wonder, well, I don't even remember starting my motor or turning it or anything. And it is great excitement. Then going back to the idea of again, going back is, if it were really bad, you wouldn't even remember it.
Yeah.
I won't say you won't remember it, because I'm sure that some guy that can remember the real horrible things and effects, but the mind's always pushing that out.
Yeah.
It's hiding in the subconscious level someplace.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, many people get mentally ill because they've pushed that back in that subconscious level, and it's bugging them, and they don't know what's bugging them because they don't remember that it's that particular instant. I'm sure this is what happens when many soldier or sailor or serviceman, his best friend gets killed. In his mind, he probably thought he could do something to save his life. In reality, he probably couldn't. He keeps pushing it back and pushing it back in his mind, and he has nightmares, all kind of. Until you can get that out and talk about it, But it's war is strange. It's just a strange way of living. And see, I'm of the opinion that Vietnam, if it hadn't been drugs involved in Vietnam, we wouldn't have the problems with those servicemen that we have. I know a lot of young men that were there, and you don't even know they've been to Vietnam. And there's other guys come out and every day telling you every day, or they've got signs, even the war's been over 11 years now, and you still see more looking like the way they were when they were serving. I believe many of those boys were on some kind of drugs that affected them more deeply than the war did. And I think those are the ones that are still, even though again, they're talking about a serviceman in World War II, nobody knows anything about it. They hardly, what you guys do? That's the big one. So, there's a guy on that program that used to be the loudmouth guy, and he said, big one, World War II, we all talk about it. Rob Reiner was in that show, and
Archie Bunker.
Archie Bunker, yeah.
Karen O'Connor, or
yeah.
Carol O'Connor.
But great show. And you had to, you remember we all talking about, hey, we back when we were in the big one. double, yeah, double off two or something, you know,
Yeah.
double two. With, yeah, when it comes to, you asked about funny stories there, like, there's so many of them that, and some you laughed harder at the moment than others, but stories are all servicemen. Of course, you have to remember we've been overseas. We hadn't been to a nightclub. We hadn't been to, and I mean, this was a total life. It was a boring type of life. So you always, anywhere you get servicemen together, they're just trying to make something to drink, some kind of booze.
Yeah.
And we'd take the juice off of the cherries that they made cherry cobbler for us. We'd take that juice and ferment it a little bit, make wine with it. We'd have alcohol to clean lenses of the sights on the gun, and we'd spit on the lenses and drink the alcohol and we used to make cocktails with them. Put some orange juice and grapefruit juice, and then we put in a little alcohol we had in there. And then on board our ship had been used. Took a lot of pictures on our ship to use in all kind of movies. I still see the pictures today, and I see a lot of airplanes that we shot at, or airplanes that crashed on our ship, things like that. But 20th Century Fox gave us $20,000 worth of beer at that time, without taxes and everything. It was a big pile of beer. We used to have it on board the ship, and anytime we'd dock on an island, we'd get everybody that went on the island get 3 cans of beer to take with them, or they'd take it over there, and then they'd give it to us when we got on the island. But many of the stories was all the time trying to figure out ways to get that beer. We used to always volunteer to work on the beer, and we never used to even have. We never had to do it if we didn't want to, but we always would figure out some way to get that beer. And it was always an officer put in charge of the beer, and it was a big joke and a whole lot of fun trying to outsmart that officer. How we gonna get? So we take put the beer on a small boat going to the island, and we get the island, and then it was always about 8 to 10 of the same guys that would, and we'd get on the island, we'd be carrying these beers, then everybody run in a different direction, and the officer would always chase one guy. They use the assistant, so they'd maybe chase two guys. The guys would go run as far as they could carrying this beer, and it was heavy because it was always 2 cases. And they'd throw down the beer, and the officer always stopped to pick the beer up, and of course everybody went in opposite directions. They didn't change, and we'd meet someone else on the island and drink up that beer. Instead of having 3 beers that day, we'd have maybe half a dozen ourselves. Mm-hmm. But one time, they got every time we took that beer out of there, they got smarter and smarter. So this one day, and none of the guys, it was just this John Mullins I mentioned before. 2 of us, we went down, and you get out in the hole, which is way down in the ship, and you haul the beer up. This guy would take all the beer, which was probably about 30 cases, and he'd move them from one hole over to the next, maybe 20 yards. Then he'd stack them up and count them. And boy, we're trying to figure them. We're figuring. No way to figure out how to get that beer. And anyway, finally, after we'd been working about an hour, we hadn't even got off the ship. We're going through this area where the sailors slept, and they slept on the bunks that were when you get out of your bunks, then you pushing all the bunks up against the wall, and they were hooked up there. And this guy said, "Hey, I've got it figured out." It's John Muller said, "I'll go first. I'll let that one of those bunks down. You throw that beer in there and climb. You got to disappear with the beer because you can't be there with no beer." He said, "You climb in the bunk with it and I'll hook you back up." So we're going and he let it down. I threw the beer and I climbed in, he pinned me back up there. I mean, hot. You talk about it because we were down near the equator at this time. It was hot. And I'm in there and stuffing. And I can hear this guy. They're arguing out there. "What happened to the 2 cases of beer?" And this guy said, you must come. You don't have them right. How could it? There's only us guys. We're all carrying. We're all here. That's all. So it works out. Everybody's got 2 cases of beer to carry. And they're arguing. The guy said, "Hey, I know something. Which one? What happened? Come on. One of you guys know what happened." Everybody, of course, nobody knew about it, but this one guy, John. And anyway, I'm sitting there and I'm quiet. Pretty soon, they move on. About 15 minutes later, here comes that John Yelly coming down, jumping up, kicking his feet, yelling, "We outsmarted him, Tom, we outsmarted him." He got me out of there, and we took the beer, we hid it in our works, and we put it in our egg, got a GI can, filled a beer can with ice, and put all that beer in there. And we were so mad because nobody helped us, we wouldn't give any beer out. And I sit on the can and drank beer till he went to lunch, and then I went to dinner, and I went to dinner, and he sat on the can, and finally there we sat, we were going to drink, which, let's see, 2 cases and 48, that'd be 48 bottles of beer, and we're going to drink all of it. Of course, I think we maybe got up to 6 or 7 before we both fell off the can, and when we woke up, those guys are waiting for us to fall. They knew we wouldn't make it as soon as they all grabbed the beer and drank it. We woke up, we were mad. But then we laughed about that for the next 2 years we were together. It was funny. It was really, you had to be there. I know it doesn't seem, but it was a big operation. Right. Halsey himself never planned that operation like we planned to get that beer. We used to always, it's always thought about when they move that beer, we're going to get some of it. But there's a lot of funny things. We went over to an island one time with this officer, a guy named Earnshaw. Earnshaw had been a great pitcher for the Philadelphia Phillies, and he liked to drink. He was a commander, and this buddy of mine, it was his talker during battle, his battle stations. He was his talker. He was the gunnery officer. We went to the Philippine Islands. They had a bar that was a quarter-mile long, a bar. And he'd sit there and bought, at that time you could buy a shot of whiskey for scotch, good scotch for a nickel. And he sat there and bought enough scotch to fill a gallon jug and brought it back to the ship with him. And we all, the 3 of us, came back. And we couldn't get up the gangplank. And, of course, he being a commander, we put that under his arm. They asked what's in the jug, and he told them cider and went on. And of course, I never got to see it. I never saw any more of that scotch, but that was a funny day. Funny day. Another time we got on the island, we were talking about this beer, and we got feeling pretty good, and we missed the boat going back. And now how are we going to get back? And we'd gone in swimming and lost, you never took your shoes off because of coral wood. And we'd lost, and there we are now. We're standing on the dock. How are we going to get back? All I had was I had my shorts and my shoes on. Everybody had missing some clothes. So finally a boat came up there. We asked them, they're going to the Topeka. The Topeka, so we can get on there, we'll ride to Topeka, and then we'll hope we can get another one and finally get back to our ship. And we get by the way, the Topeka was the same ship that was sold to the Argentina in the ship that the English sunk off the Falkland Islands. Yeah. It had a Bulgari or some named after some general. It used to be the Topeka. It was sold in Argentina. They changed the name of it. And the English, when they went down there, they sunk that same ship. But anyway, and of course, this might not seem funny in telling it, but you got to remember, here's three, there was about six of us, not capable of maneuvering too well. We got on the peak, and cruisers were notoriously known for, you had to be dressed neat at all times. You had to be in white uniform. You had to, on aircraft carrier, so busy that most of the time it was a little loose. It wasn't real strict as far as how you dressed and having to be with attention a lot and that type of thing. But honest, the peak was bad. And this guy said, "What the hell are you guys doing?" He says, "Come on." He took us down. He hid us in this room, and then he brought us in all kind of food we ate real well. And then he went and got a ship, a little boat someplace. He snuck us off that, and we got us back and took us back to our ship, the Yorktown. And there we were coming up the gangplank. And they were a little formal coming off. But we got in our salute at the right time. We got all the things we were supposed to do. And luckily, as we got up there, was an officer on duty. The officer of the day was a guy that we'd had stood money to watch with. He took care of us, hit us, got us down there, got us in our sacks, and woke up the next day act like nothing happened. But we had more fun. It was so funny and laughing. And I have to tell you this. One of the funniest things was that this Mullins I was talking about, he had this contact through this Commander Earnshaw. But anyway, we went in his brother's ship. He was on an old four-stacker, the Detroit, old ship that couldn't go into the battles because it was so old. It had four stacks on it. It was probably built somewhere around 1920 or somewhere around there. Anyway, his brother was on that ship, and he hadn't seen him in a while. So we go down, and we talked the guy into giving us the Admiral's barge. Admiral barge is usually Admiral has a special ship. It's usually a fast-moving ship that. This has got Admiral's flag on it and everything like that. And we go racing across the water. This guy's taking us over to Detroit. Detroit sees this ship coming up, and it's got an Admiral's flag on the Admiral's ship, a boat, a barge they call it. And we hopped off. We run up the deck. When we get up there, they signal. They figure the Admiral was coming. They signal. They got side boys. They got everybody there standing ready to salute and everything. And we come running up, and he says, "What the hell are you guys doing?" And he said, "I came to see my brother." He said, "What's your brother's name?" He said, "Bill Mullins." And he said, "Jesus Christ, it had to." He says, if I knew someone was doing something wrong, you had to be related to Bill, because he's the only guy on our ship would do something like you guys are doing right now. and we went, and the guy said, "How did you get that boat?" We said, "Oh, we asked for it and they gave it to us." Which wasn't true. But when it really funny, and we got to laugh really hard, was when we told them to signal Yorktown to send back our boat to get us. And the guy came back from the Admiral's bar. This guy, and his brother, we saw his brother a couple months later, he said, those guys still talk about that on that ship that they tried. He says, how the guys came up, and my brother came up in the Admiral's barge. And these stories are really funny because you don't fool around with Admirals. You don't fool around with their equipment. You don't fool around going to other ships who have a set of rules that are different from yours. But to do them and get away with them and laugh all the way doing it. The stories are, but they go on and on and on and on. And for the major operation of getting a bottle of whiskey on board ship, And that's probably the biggest risk we had that time. We were going over the fence with the whiskey. And if some guy saw it, he might have shot us. But they're five funny stories.
Okay, let's see. Let's get back with the U.S. government and Roosevelt. From the time you started in the war till the end of the war, what do you think? What was your personal attitude toward them? Did you hate them?
Roosevelt?
Did you respect them?
No, you couldn't. It's hard today especially with some of the attacks that are being made on Roosevelt today. Roosevelt did things before the war, during the war, that were very illegal. He did a lot worse things that Nixon never thought of doing. But you have to remember the Great Depression. And even though he did illegal things, they were done in the effort to get us out of the Depression and get us moving again. And then he realized early in the war, you remember the war started in 1939 in Europe. We didn't go into 41. During that time there, and we weren't prepared. If we'd had to fight that time, I don't think we could have fought. We couldn't have been of much help either. I don't think they could have invaded us and taken us over. We could have gone and helped anybody. But he realized that we one day would be in it, and we'd be in on the side of the Allies. And of course, the propaganda started, and he sold 50 destroyers to England. It was an illegal transaction, but they needed them. And they were old destroyers, and they needed them. And he did it anyhow. They started the Lend-Lease and all those things. Of course, America then started moving. You look at people of our age look upon Roosevelt as a great savior. Even though he broke the Constitution, laws of the Constitution, he did.
But he got the job done.
But, and he prepared us. By the time we got into the war, we weren't quite prepared, because when they sunk our fleet there at Pearl Harbor, we didn't have any fleet at that time. But at least we were already starting to build them. They were in the shipyards. They were already building warships. And it wasn't too long after that when they started coming out. No, Roosevelt was looked upon as a great leader. Another story I want to tell about, as a young student in school, I always studied about, I forget what was the fellow's name. He was great. He was supposed to be just a story about a guy in the Navy. And you see in a lot of movies where when the battle starts, they run the flag up and away. But the day Roosevelt died, we got word somewhere around 10 o'clock in the morning that he died. And then immediately they put the flag at half-mast on the ship. And they probably did that to every ship in the fleet. Well, it wasn't an hour later when we were attacked by a bunch of Japanese airplanes. And I always remember looking up to see what they did with the flag. And just true to the form of the story, as soon as they got word the Japanese planes were coming, I looked up and they run the flag back up. And that's when I remember about Roosevelt. And then, of course, Truman came in after that. Truman knew nothing about what was going on. Vice president in those days they weren't supposed to know, so they never told him. And even it is today, but they seem to give more information than they did in those days. I think probably the war, and that's probably through Truman coming into taking over the presidency, didn't know anything about atomic bomb, didn't know anything about that it was in the process of being built, didn't know anything about a lot of little things that were going on, and he had to. And of course, I think, personally myself, that Truman, who put down history, is probably our greatest president. I'd put him ahead of Jefferson and Lincoln or some of those guys. Not because, but those guys did something that was very, very important. But under trying situations, Truman, the things he did during the war and after the war, Truman, I don't think you can ever find anything. Very few people say anything about Truman. Even Republicans talk. Republicans will talk against Roosevelt. There's a lot of historians that talk against Roosevelt nowadays because just because I say he broke the law, I look upon him as had to be done.
Yeah, I mean, he might have broke the law, but he got the job done,
Yeah,
I think.
that's and of course you're going to have those strict historians. You'll say, well,
he could have did it this way. He could have
the means justify the ends. You know? But Truman, he was a hard-nosed guy. Truman went in a poor man and came out a poor man. I don't think he poor by, I'm talking about poor by the standards of a president of the United States. I think when he died, he only had about $400,000 in his estate. So he never gained anything being president of the United States, and he was there for 2 terms. But this guy. And if you get down to some of the Marshall and some of our admirals, like Halsey and in my particular Halsey and Michener and Nimitz, and over in the military, you had Eisenhower and Patton and MacArthur in the Pacific and Stilwell and then getting down again back to the captains of your ship. They're very well trained. Our military leadership in the American service was so superior to everybody else, just superior. They top notch. They'd been trained well, and they picked military men who did the job very well. I don't remember an incident. Patton slapped a soldier. He, under great pressure too, he probably shouldn't have done it. I don't know what I'd done. I probably slapped him back, but I don't know. I say that. I see you say that now. You probably so scared of a guy of his rank. But I never came across any person of great authority in the war that made you afraid of them. I remember one time when it was raining, there was a storm going on, and we were all in, instead of being out where the weather we had to be, we stayed near our battle station. We got back in the hallway. It was real crowded, and the door opens up. When the door opens up, the lights go off. They have red lights, but they go off too. And this guy stepped through, and he stepped on the sailors near us. And he said, "What the hell are you doing? Damn, watch what you're doing." And the guy says, "I'm sorry." And then when he closed the door, it was this Rear Admiral Radford that I was telling you about. You talk about guys scattering and moving. But he went on. He realized what trying condition. You see stories about, I never saw a cruel officer. I saw a couple of dumb ones that were very self-centered and thought they made mistakes, but the kind of mistakes they made never hurt anybody. They just
would blame it on other people. You said they're self-centered.
Yeah, it was just that they thought they didn't make it.
Yes.
Yeah, and whatever they did was right. Mm-hmm. and it's very easy for an officer to be that way if he wants to be. But I never saw one that was cruel. Did anything cruel. One thing being on an aircraft carrier is called a capital ship. And the capital ships are usually manned by the officer of high rank, and most of the, especially all the most of the officers on the capital ship come out of Annapolis graduates, and they were the ones that would go up the fastest in rank. And eventually, if you stayed in long enough, you was going to become an admiral too.
Yeah. Okay. You said earlier that you were on the entire war. You were on the Yorktown.
Yes.
Okay. Where were you at when the war ended? When we bombed Japan?
When we bombed Japan, we were patrolling along all kind of raids up and down the Japanese coast. We started down Kyushu, and we go up and down the coast. When they dropped the bomb, the second one, we didn't even know the first one was going off. The second, we knew we were about 150 miles away, knew it was going to fall, and we all got glasses on looking in that direction and I thought, geez, we're going to see a chunk of the earth. You'd heard about this great bomb. Well, I looked in that direction. I never saw it. I never saw anybody saw it.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm under the impression that the atomic bomb wasn't as powerful. They made that out.
Where you were, did the Earth or high waves or anything? I mean, nothing.
Yeah,
it might sound weird, but you never know.
Yeah. Imagine if you were a couple hundred yards away. Yeah, but it wasn't as powerful.
How far did you say you were away from there?
About 150 miles.
We
never saw it.
So, but don't you have to be like 17? Whenever you're out in the ocean, all you see is 17 miles every direction.
Well, it's 11. It's 11 miles. It's all right.
Okay, but still think that
you're thinking, 150 miles. Yeah, you're thinking that thing is going to be so powerful that see this big fire in the sky, and we never saw anything. Actually, the day we got we were sailing towards Tokyo Bay. We were going to make an attack on Tokyo Bay that morning, and it must have been about 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning. They came on the loudspeaker and said the war was over, and we immediately turned around, started steaming away. But we stayed up and down the coast just in case anything would happen. And in fact, 3 days after we got word that the war was over, that they were quitting, the Japanese plane came from someplace, and I think I don't know what he was trying to do, but I don't think he wasn't attacking us because he ran into, and we fired at him. And that was one of the last things. They say that a submarine shot the last shell in the war, but people in our task force shot at that airplane. And that was 3 days after the fighting quit. So what the accident? I'm sure that they had it timed and all that. It must have been the submarine, but we had to. Our task force had to fire some of the last shots.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, we were just off the coast of Japan and all that. Mm-hmm. Go back talking about the atomic bomb is something very interesting.
Yeah.
People don't know about it in history. You hear about how many people died at Hiroshima, how many died at Nagasaki. Well, every year, not every year, but every decade since the war has ended, that number of people killed in there has come down. Every time a new historian writes a new book, it's a little less. The only thing, you remember I was talking back earlier when the bomb raid, the first bomb, they made a bomb raid from Saipan, Tinian.
Yeah.
They had 400 B-29s one time. And they firebombed Tokyo itself. They went in there with incendiary, set fire to the whole town. And fires burn the oxygen. If the fire is hot enough, it'll burn the oxygen. People die, and they'll die from lack of oxygen. A lot of thousands, millions, not millions, but thousands of them died that way. And of course, a lot of them were burned. But the great firebombing of Tokyo, there was 100,000 people, 1,000 people lost in that alone. Mm-hmm. And yet you hear very little about that. All you hear about the atomic bomb, because that's a horrible weapon. Yeah. It did it faster, probably, but they never. I think Cologne was the worst. Firebomb to Cologne.
Would napalm, that stuff they use in Vietnam, does that do the same stuff? I mean, was that what, when you bombed, when you set something on fire, does that, does napalm just like make a fire to where someone can't cross?
Well, it's jelly. Napalm's a jelly.
Okay.
And it burns, and they would have been great firebombing it was something where you know, when you got in the bushes, things would spread out all over it, and it would burn. It would have been great if they didn't have napalm. These incendiary bombs are actually hot oxygen in them, and they're little strips of metal, and they burn real fast, real hot. And of course, you get a piece on you, you're not going to live from it. Yeah. But it burns real fast. But they could carry more of them. They were little bombs. They weren't great big ones. And they would just go down there.
Impact.
Well, they would burn real fast and real hot, and they'd set fire to anything in a hurry. Mm-hmm. And they would just drop them all over. And once all at the same time, and once the fire would be out of control instantly, and you couldn't organize your fire forces. And of course, it's over a great area, they would get caught up. But they burned. When I was in Tokyo, they burned right up. And they said, we're not going to fool around with the Imperial Palace. The Imperial Palace had a big moat around it. Mm-hmm. With goldfish, great big, beautiful goldfish. And they burned right up to the one side. They burnt the ground. They burned every building down right up to the moat and left that island out there with the Imperial Palace on it and the Emperor in there. Mm-hmm. Didn't even bother. There wasn't any damage at all done. And that's one of the things that amazed me about how they fought that war and the things they could do. Burned right up to him, and stopped at the moat. And of course, that was, I mean, there's just another example and I'm sure in some of the questions you asked me that you want a little insight into other things besides just the fighting itself. I'm sure there's a lot of historians know about this and probably have written about it, but you don't see stories about the great fire.
Like I was saying, you could sit there and you could tell a story the way it happened because you were there. You have your 30, 40-year-old, what do you call them? People who do TV shows, and they they think they know everything because they read about it. Yeah. Or they read what another 30 or 40-year-old man wrote. And not, you had to be there to know the most.
Yeah, and I was fortunate in some way. We were on what I call a capital ship. We had an admiral all the time. Yeah. And the information that would come to that ship, even that it wasn't passed out to everybody to read. But the guy that was bringing it in, he'd show you some information about things that happened and or what's going, not so much what's going to happen, what happened. Every once in a while, there was always soon as we leave port, it was all about where are we going this time? We're going all the way to Tokyo this time. Then they'd take bets on it. But we very seldom knew where we was going until you got out to sea so far, and even the Admiral didn't know until we got out to sea so far, and then they would open up the secret papers. But there was all kind of documents that we'd get that read about certain things before they and even today, we was at Pearl Harbor one time, and they had Marines were unloading some LSTs or loading them, I should say, I don't know. And one of them exploded, and there was 1,000 servicemen right there in Pearl Harbor killed them. And I've only seen one story, and that was it used to be a True magazine. It was one story, and the way it was written, if I hadn't known it to be true, it would seem like the guy just made this story up. Because everybody heard about 1,000 Marines getting killed on an accident. But it was an insignificant part, and they probably suppressed the information to keep the enemy from knowing about it.
Yeah.
And
moms and dads.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, missing in action.
Yeah. Look what they did.
That happens now.
Look what they did to that poor guy in the Desert Storm. Yeah. He shot hit the wrong tank. He was in the nighttime. And they court-martialed the guy and kicked him out of the service. That happened all the time in the big war. I mean, no one intended to do it. Yeah. Oh, we used to, ships would fly over an airplane when the enemy airplane's coming. Our pilots would start chasing them, and they'd chase them right into our ships, and our ships would go right on shooting them. Sometimes we shot down our own pilots. It was, but it had to be done.
Okay. So, well, that looks like it. I'd like to thank you for,
yeah, it was interesting, and I'm glad I could help you. It was interesting doing it. I hope that I didn't ramble on too much and made it sound like an old man talking about
well, hey, my professor's going to have a lot of these to listen to, and I haven't known him for that long. I've only known him a semester, but he enjoys stuff like this. So
it's I'm sure that I leave here. There's a couple of stories I'd like to told you. Oh, one more. I'm talking about a funny one. It's funny in a way. I was at boot camp. The guy we went from Canton down here, and there's a guy down in Canton. He was an accountant. And he'd quit high school in the 10th grade. I guess high school must have bored him or something. He quit in the 10th grade, but he married the boss's daughter, an accountant, and he was a genius. You'd ask him what the square root of 4,244,000. He'd just rattle. He'd tell you right now. He knew he could do all that stuff in his mind. But they had what they call boot camp. They all call it granny officers. The guy who was in charge of training you, he would select people out and he gave them jobs. This guy was a granny officer first class, which was he was head of all the others. He had the duty of handing out watch duties. I don't know why. I still don't know why. And, I don't know whether he's mad at me or what but I'd always end up with a midnight watch. And there wasn't such a thing as sleeping in the next morning. If you stayed up all night, you went. You didn't have to go on a watch that night, but that guy would always, instead of giving me, say, from 4 o'clock to 8 o'clock in the afternoon, or 8 to 12 or something like that, make it easier on me, always give me that midnight watch. So then we went into a boxing program, a training boxing. They put 6, and you go in there and every time I said, I'm fighting you. This guy was a guy he never knew he was. He knew as much about boxing. He knew much about anything athletic. He'd never done anything. He'd stand. He was a bigger. He's about, I'd say, a good 75 pounds bigger than I was. And I was so mad at that guy out there. And I'd hit on that guy and hit on that guy, hit on that guy with these big 60. And you get tired. You just have boxed minute round, time a minute off, 2 minute round, time off a minute, 2 more minutes, time off a minute, 2 more minutes. 6 minutes off. So I hit on that guy, and this went on for about 6 weeks. Finally, we all split up. And I don't see, this is 6 months later, I'm going down the dock in Pearl Harbor. I look down the way, and here comes this guy. But this time, they'd already taken out of it, and he was lieutenant junior grade, which is 1 rank above an ensign, which is a pretty good position. They had taken him and put him into the accounting department, used the skills that he knew so well.
What rank did you get up to?
I got up to a second class petty officer, okay, which is a long way from this guy. And this guy's an officer, you know. And I thought, now here's a guy I hit on and hit him. If I hit him one time, I hit him 50,000 times. I mean, I hit it. I would be so mad at that guy. And I couldn't hurt him. He had these big 6-ounce stuff, but I just got all my frustration out of him. And I thought, oh my God, you know, I'm going down there and he spots me. I know I'm dead now. He's going to find something wrong and I'm going to end up in the break. I know I'm going to end up in the break. And I go up to the guy and he grabbed me and he hugged me and he picked me off the ground. He says, I miss you, he said. And I said, well, I missed you too, you know. And ever after that, I kind of liked the guy. I wish I'd have run into him more after, but I never saw him. I haven't seen him since that day again, since that day. But this guy here, I thought, oh, he's going to be mad at me. He's been waiting all this month to become an officer so he can really get me. And he picked me up and hugged me. Kissed me on the back of the neck. He's real happy to see me.
Well, I'd like to thank you again.
I wished. Yeah, I hope it comes out good.
Yeah, it should. So, well,
and remember the Yorktown.
Yeah.
By the way, the Yorktown today is a memorial in Charleston, South Carolina. Yeah. Right out there at just in towards the bay from Fort Sumter. And if you ever get down there, go see it. Yeah. In fact, I'm going to Charleston next month, and I might get out there to see the old ship. I've been down there to see it one time. It's a memorial down there in Charleston, South Carolina. Mm-hmm. Well, this here's Scott Collier. You've heard Tom Collier, my uncle's World War II Yorktown story. So I hope you enjoyed it.